we assign roles. There's the victim, there's the instigator, there's the tattler. And once those roles get handed out, kids start living into them, and that breeds the cycle. And most parents don't even realize that we are the ones keeping it going. Hi, everyone, and thank you for listening to the Ask Mom Parenting podcast, where we take the mystery and the yelling out of modern parenting and offer real-life self-help for parents. I'm Sue, and with me is Randy. And whether you're deep in the toddler tantrums or navigating tween and teen drama, or somewhere in between, you'll get clarity and actionable tools one episode at a time. I started Ask Mom to be a common sense voice for parents, one that cuts through all the noise and teaches busy moms and dads what actually works for changing kids' behavior and building respectful cooperation. If you would like to support this podcast, leaving a rating or a review really does help other parents find us and tells us that we're covering topics that you're interested in. So if you can rate, subscribe, or leave us a quick review for Ask Mom Parenting, it would tell us that we're putting out the helpful tips that you guys want. Today's topic is to stop sibling fights tonight, a proven strategy that restores peace. I'm downstairs cleaning, and it's 1 p.m. on a Saturday. Music is on, I'm humming, I'm finally in my own head for a minute. Then, boom, my millisecond of peace gets pierced by the sound of kids screaming at each other upstairs, and someone is crying. Instantly, I am furious, and why can't they just all get along? At least stay out of each other's way, something. Sibling fights are the every parent struggle. We all deal with it. But just because it's common does not mean that it has to be the norm. And it definitely does not mean that we have to live with it. If you've been listening, you know that I teach parenting from two angles: what to think and what to do. So mindset first and then method. And honestly, lately with parents of teens that I've been coaching in my workshops, I'm teaching acting skills, because the acting like you're disinterested or that you're not overly concerned more than they are is just as much of that mindset. So healthy detachment isn't just a concept, it's how you show up. Anyway, back to my story. The kids come tumbling down the stairs. There's 4 of them. Each one knows exactly what happened, and each one knows the version of the story that they are about to sell me. I saw nothing, but I'm already mad. And I want this over. I see one of the triplets crying. My oldest is not crying. Someone's holding their arm. And in my frustration, I quickly piece together what I am sure happened. And then I assign the blame on the spot. I snap at my oldest and I pull the crying child in for comfort. And guess what happened next? They all immediately turned on me, just like that. The fight between them, gone, and I am now the bad guy. It's like siblings can be at each other's throats 1 second, but the minute a neighbor kid throws a punch to one of them, they immediately go from hating each other to uniting to kick his ass. I may as well have been the neighbor kid who just threw the first punch. That moment right there, my reaction, that's exactly what we're going to talk about today. Because if we don't understand this, we're going to stay stuck in the same cycle. And that's why sibling fights continue to happen. We keep responding the same way and expecting it to change. So today, we're getting to the bottom of what actually does work and how to start ending sibling fights for good. Let's set the tone for what happens when our kids start fighting. We hear it and we instantly jump into fix-it mode and we try to shut it down. What happened? Who started it? Why can't they just get along? And I feel like, I just need to fix this. There's this belief that a good parent steps in, solves it, and restores peace. And honestly, that does feel responsible. There are 3 dynamics that drive sibling fights. Okay, it's gaining power, gaining attention, and the illusion that something called fairness actually exists. So number 1 is gaining power. Having power can be a driving emotion. Power isn't always bad, but unmanaged power creates the exact fights that parents try to stop. Power gets experimented with. It's there. And kids test it, and they feel it, and they learn how to use it, but we don't have to hand it to one kid or the other. Number 2 is gaining attention. Attention is currency. Positive or negative, both pay. If it works, they keep using it. I never used to believe that a child was actually happy with negative attention until it happened to me. I tested this. Okay. So my oldest was perfectly okay making the triplets cry and having me involved. And I eventually turned this around with a simple hug and more one-on-one time because as it turns out, being yelled at doesn't solve the behavior. Okay. And number three, sibling fights occur because kids have this beautiful little illusion that fairness is a real thing. Fairness and equality sound amazing, okay? But things are not equal. Trying to force them to be keeps you stuck in the middle of every fight. The law of averages will have someone winning, someone losing, and long term, it will roughly work itself out. If we keep getting involved and stepping in to balance things out, we're not teaching fairness, we're just redistributing power between our kids each time that we get involved. The moment you step in, one child wins, one child loses at your discretion, and those roles get reinforced into adulthood. With each fight you solve, there becomes a victim, an instigator, a good one, or a difficult one. Kids start to cling to these roles, and that patterning doesn't start with the kids. It gets built in from us getting involved.
I am really glad we're talking about this today because this is definitely something that I'm struggling with right now a little bit. And it's funny because I think a lot of times, especially in parenting, if we're not really sure what to do, we sort of like default to, our childhood. Maybe we do what our parents did, what our parents, maybe what we didn't want them to do. But in the case of sibling fights, it's funny because my husband and I, we really don't have much to draw from, even from experience. So I grew up in a house with one older sister. She was about 8 years older than me. So that alone was just like a very interesting experience because, we definitely had back and forth, but a lot of times it was just like my mom would look at me like, why are you 12 years old arguing with a 4-year-old? So a lot of times, like, there were some like default things that I think, my parents would do, especially because the age difference was so great. So my kids are 3.5 years apart, and my husband is the only boy with two older sisters, 6 years older and 10 years older. So in that case, they were just like protective of the little brother. So we're like looking at each other like, he didn't even really have many sibling fights. We don't even know what to draw on from our own experience. And our kids, 3.5 years, are just like, it's just enough to like, they have more in common than like we did with our siblings to like really get under each other's skin. And I think it's interesting that you mentioned like how your kids kind of turned a situation on you because yeah, that like light bulb moment went off because that's happened to me a lot too,
Mm.
where my son is the younger one, but he's pretty protective of his sister. So he'll come and like, this thing happened and it was so unfair. And if I address it with her, a lot of times he'll be like, don't get mad at her.
Ah.
And when you said that, I just like, wow, it really clicked. Yeah. So I'll definitely probably have some questions for you, as we talk about this, but I do really have to say, I do like that you talked about the roles that will start to pattern and take with them into adulthood. And I think that's really important because I think, especially today, I think a lot of us parents, we come to this journey and seek out people to help us with parenting because that's exactly what we don't want. We want to teach, healthy conflict resolution with them as kids and not like take those patterns and almost like identities into adulthood because I could definitely see where that might happen.
Well, as you're talking, I'm kind of reminded about, so I thought about when I was writing this and researching this, I thought about my own kids and my personal experience because, that was such a, talk about a light bulb moment when my kids turned on me. I'm like, whoa, like I'm a pretty quick study. I'm like, okay, all right, I know what not to do. But when I think about my own sibling relationship with my older brother, who's 3.5 years older, and it's interesting because yes, he was very much a tease back in those days. It was like teasing, teasing, teasing. And he used to punch me, he used to pinch me. And, I'm not a real tattletale type, but a few times I was just like, I didn't know what else to do. And I did tell my parents, and there was a mix between them doing nothing. So I felt like, what good is it to say anything? Or my brother getting hit. And I remember one time my brother punched me and I was starting to kind of swell up on my arm. And my brother got his butt beat like back in the day. You know what I mean? They took him in the other room and I heard it and I was like, oh, like if I was a person that was tempted toward being drunk with power, I would have been like, oh, that's easy to, get him in trouble. But I'm
Yeah.
not that way. So what I ended up doing was like protecting him. There's a lot of psychology and layers that go on between sibling fights. There's a lot of just that underneath layer, and it's a very real thing that we are establishing roles with our involvement. So I'm excited to get into today's podcast because what I'm talking about is going to neutralize all of that. So parents unintentionally do keep fueling the cycle of sibling fights that they hate so much. We step in because that's what good parents do, right? But first we want peace and we're sick of the fighting and we feel responsible for stopping it. But let's be honest, how's that working out for us? Because every time I stepped in, I would have bitterness from the kids, or again, they would turn on me. So we also tell ourselves that we're preventing someone from getting hurt. But kids get bumped, they get pushed, they get upset, and that's part of childhood. Why do we think we need to eliminate that between them? And so here's what happens every time that we step in. We pick a side, even if we think we saw it. We don't fully know the extent of what happened. Even though we think we saw somebody getting hit, we don't know that she didn't steal something from his room an hour earlier or whatever. We don't know this dynamic. We don't know what's really going on. All right. We tend to respond to the loudest child. And we protect the younger one because we are sure that they need it. The older one starts to resent it and digs their heels in and feels that we don't understand them. I know there was a time where one of my daughter was crying and my older son was in the vicinity and I was sure that it was something that he said or did. Turns out I talked to one of her triplet brothers and found out he was actually protecting her and saving her from her pissing the dog off, and I was afraid she was going to get bit. So just like in my story, I was sure I knew what happened, and in seconds I had all four of them turning on me because now in my effort to help, I did something else entirely. We assign roles. There's the victim, there's the instigator, there's the tattler. And once those roles get handed out, kids start living into them, and that breeds the cycle. And most parents don't even realize that we are the ones keeping it going.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, I think it's definitely something that is kind of getting brought to my attention right now. That as you say that, 'cause I'm like, yeah, I do step in to protect my younger one, and that's exactly what my mom did with me too. So this is all really interesting information. And I know for me, as my kids get older, like I'm trying my best to stay out of things completely and let my kids handle things. And, sometimes that's really hard. So if I want to take a step back and let my kids handle the conflict independently, what is the best way to start doing that?
Okay, so if you want, today we're going to talk about solving sibling fights for good today. Okay, that's it. There's one key strategy, and there are two reinforcement behaviors that you can do that make this strategy work. The number one strategy is to stay out of fights. We've been leading up to this whole time. Stay out of it. And I don't mean sometimes, I mean always, okay? If you didn't see what happened, you're out. Even if you did see it, you're still mostly out. You are not the referee, the judge, or the jury. Your job is simple. Simply stay out of it. The only way that we would get involved is for safety, not to solve it. If someone is hurt or bleeding or in real danger, you step in to keep everyone safe, not to investigate, not to assign blame, just to tend to the boo-boo. That's it. We're staying neutral, and I will teach you how. Here is why this works. And, don't worry, we're going to get to how to do this effectively. Sibling fights don't just happen. They work for the kids. There's an element working for them. They work because they pull you in, and there's a payoff for one of the kids. One kid gets attention, one kid gains power, one kid gets to be the victim, and you become the authority that they play off of. So the fight isn't the problem, the payoff is. When you step in, you create the winners and the losers. You reward the loudest or the most dramatic. And you accidentally train those roles, the victim, the instigator, the tattler. When you stay out, the payoff disappears, the audience is gone, and the power shift dies. And over time, the fight loses its purpose. And here's how you'll know you're winning, because I promise you, someday you're going to hear, I'm telling mom. And the other kid will say, go ahead, she's just going to tell us to work it out. And that's the moment you've officially stepped out of the triangle. So we shift the lens, and instead of reacting, we start observing. There's always a purpose behind the fight. Kids are constantly testing us. They're asking, who am I in this family? What works with mom? Where do I get my power? And so in fights, you'll see patterns. The victim, the know-it-all, the power tester, the attention grabber. And your job isn't to stop the fight. Your job is to understand what the fight is doing for them. Ask yourself, who is gaining something here? In a quick example, a brother who's 4 is messing with his sister who's 5. While she's watching TV, he's pulling her shirt, he's tracing letters on her arm, and she says, stop. He keeps going. She bites him. He cries. She gets in trouble. And it looks obvious, right? Wrong. He won. He learned I can provoke her and she gets in trouble. And that is power. Kids don't plan this consciously, but they absolutely do repeat what works for them. And here's the part parents don't love hearing. If he doesn't want to get bitten, he'll eventually learn to stop provoking her. That's the natural consequence doing its job. So if the strategy is to stay out of fights, here are the 2 reinforcement behaviors that will make this strategy work. Reinforcement number 1 is set the boundaries before the fights happen. This is where most parents can kind of get confused. You don't explain during the fight. You set it up before the fight happens. A calm training moment, okay, a neutral tone. You'll say something like, if you fight, I'm not getting involved. I'm no longer getting involved in the middle of your fights. You're going to need to work it out or separate. If this keeps going, the activity stops for both of you. No investigation, no courtroom, and no one wins. Everyone is in the same boat, treated equally. Equal consequence for both fighters. Not a punishment, just a reset. Here's an optional tip for young kids. I love this idea, and we use this with ours. You can train them to use something like a peace rug or a peace spot, like an area. You can give them a very simple process, and then they take turns, they talk, and they reset. There is no need to overcomplicate this. This is probably, I would say, anywhere from 3 to 8 can use this. But, even if you've done it when they were younger and it's a kind of a habit that you've created in the home, it could go on for forever. The power is in you not stepping in. You're going to train them how to use this first, okay? You're going to have the rug or the area as a designated neutral space where they can take turns listening, sharing, and giving. Expressing feelings and find compromise. Yes, you will have to facilitate this for the younger kids until they get the hang of it. You're going to show them what's expected, but they can pull out the rug or they can find the safe space where they sit and they ask each other a question, and they will have to hear each other out and find a compromise and put themselves in the other one's shoes for a moment. Reinforcement number 2, build the skill after it happens. So far we have prior to the fights in a neutral time, we're going to train them. I'm no longer getting involved. Both of you will have consequences if you're fighting. And here's how this is going to play out before the struggle. If you're noticing a lot of, like in your case, Randy, you're saying that your kids are starting to fight a little more, you're going to take a training moment and you're going to tell them, hey, here's the new MO. I'm not getting involved. All right. Then you can also teach and train with the peace rug and say, here's how you can use this. You both sit down and you listen to each other, you hear each other, and you share. And if you think that that's something that this particular fight could use, great, you can facilitate. If not, that's fine. So then you have the fight. You're staying out of it, but they separate. After, reinforcement number 2 is that you build the skills after the fights happen. And this part parents skip. Okay. They say these first ideas, staying out of it, this doesn't work. They get frustrated, but let's call it what it actually is. This is the leadership and training part, because real parenting doesn't happen in the middle of chaos. It happens before, and after in the quiet moments that no one thinks matters. Now, I know what you are thinking. You're hearing all of this, and I hear these concerns in my workshops. You're saying, if I stay out of this, it's going to escalate. That is the fear. Someone is going to get hurt. And they might. They might even if you get involved. So let's just take that off the table. This is exactly why most parents don't jump in. And it's exactly why the cycle keeps going. Because jumping in feels like it's parenting, but it's not. It's interference. If stepping in worked, you would not be dealing with this anymore, right? Because I know that's the epiphany that I had to have. Here's what building the skill and leadership actually looks like with sibling fights. Later, when everybody is calm, you step in as a leader, not a referee. You ask, what happened there? What could you guys do differently next time? Were you able to resolve it for both of you? Again, neutral, everybody's in the same boat. I'm not picking sides, and I'm not assigning any authority or roles to the tattler, the victim, or anything like that. Now you're teaching. You're teaching conflict resolution, negotiation, self-awareness, and these are real life skills. As an observer, say you notice you have one child leaning toward bullying or control. You can now notice that and say you can start giving them a different role to grow into in the home outside of the sibling fight. So you can give responsibility to the one that might be leaning more toward that bully or that control fixation. Give responsibility, give leadership, call out who they can be and not what they did. Outside of the fight, when things calm down, you can channel the bully into a leader by putting them in charge of something. Family game night, cooking, mapping out the family hike, organizing something, wherever their talent or interest lies. I remember we went hiking, and we would divide up. One kid got to carry the little first aid kit, and he would put the, Band-Aid on a blister or whatever. And, that was his role. And he really leaned into that role for years, to the point where he went and did volunteer firefighting and really was going to get his EMS and whatever. But it's just so funny, the power that we have to open our kids up to these types of opportunities. So instead of yelling and assigning blame and letting this kid lean into power through sibling fights, we're channeling that in other ways. We're seeing this and going, okay, we're going to give this kid an opportunity to lead in some other way. You can also say things like, I see how much your brother looks up to you. You're really patient when you choose to be. Programming our kids for good. Kids lean into this identity that we reinforce. Let's talk about how this can play out in the moment. So our old way, okay, is that one child screams, we rush in, what happened, who started it? We take their word for it, and we, investigate, we pick a side, and we hand out a consequence. And the result is that one child gets your attention, the other feels wronged and misunderstood, and the cycle repeats. The new way is that you've already done the training in advance as to how you are going to respond. You're not getting sucked in. All right. Explaining that you're not getting involved. You expect them to solve it fairly with love. And now your only job from there is to follow through. You're staying neutral. You're using very few words, and there's no yelling needed. Sounds like you two need to work it out, or they can separate. You've trained this, and they know it's coming. No investigating, no sides, and no long explanations. The result is that the payoff is gone. And when the payoff disappears, the behavior starts to lose its purpose. So a real quick reality check, because I know this is different from what most of us are already doing. This is going to feel uncomfortable at first. You may hear maybe more noise. You may hear less. That doesn't mean that it's not working. It means the system is changing, and that is how change feels.
Wow. Yeah, I really love this. And sounds, pretty simple. It sounds like it could probably be a lot of, just getting used to the new system, like you just said, and consistency. But I really love how this is like, developing new skills in kids, and really sounds like this can have a lot of benefits to it. So just a question I wanted to ask. So if I take all this information and I start doing this tonight, what kind of changes can I expect to see in my home and with my kids?
So short term, and this is where most parents tend to quit. Okay. Fights might get a little louder, they may get louder before they get better. Your kids will test you. They're going to test you hard because they don't know that they believe that you're staying out of fights after all the patterning that's gone on up until this point. The old pattern is breaking, and that always creates friction. Don't read this as failure. This is the shift happening. Fighting starts to lose its steam, and tattling will start to drop off because it no longer works. Kids begin solving things without you. Long term, and this is what you're actually building, there's no more assigned roles, no victim, no bad kid. Sibling relationships will get stronger because you're not in the middle of them. And your home will get quieter, not because you controlled it, but because you stepped out of it. And most important, your kids will walk away with real life skills on conflict resolution. This is teaching how to handle conflict, how to take responsibility, and how to navigate relationships without needing someone else to fix it. So, to recap, we've got the strategy. The number one strategy to sibling fights is to stay out of them. We've explained why and how our involvement does more damage and keeps the fights going. Then, to reinforce the strategy of staying out of it, to make this productive and effective, prior to fights, you're going to have a training moment and you're going to set the boundary ahead of time. Hey, I'm not staying out. I expect you guys to solve it. You can throw the peace rug idea in there or the peace space where you facilitate their own conflict resolution so that each person is heard and understood. And then reinforcement number 2 is to build the skill after it happens. You always circle back, follow up. How did that work out? Did you find that that was helping you? You know, you're putting all the kids in the same boat. They're all being separated. There's no winner and there's no loser. Most of us were taught that good parenting means staying in control. When you parent using control, your kids need you for everything. When you lead well, they start handling more of it without you. Leadership does not chase the moment, it shapes what happens around it. If what we talked about today resonates for you, I want you to know there is a whole system behind it. It's called fight-free parenting, and it's my step-by-step system that finally breaks the cycle. Fighting, yelling, the awful feeling that you reacted in a way that you wished you hadn't. Parents are seeing real change from within the first week. Go check it out at askmomparenting.com, get help, and then Fight-Free Parenting is underneath that tab. I'll have a link for it in the show as well. Thank you so much for listening and happy parenting.